Shalom, this is Rabbi Johnny Solomon, the virtual rabbi, and welcome to my online Chumash Rashi shiur dedicated in memory to my dear friend Yudale ben Shmuel Lenny Borgia. Today we're learning about Pasuk Beshalach, sharing different Pasukim, Rashis, and different commentaries, which I hope you enjoy and perhaps you may want to share with others. Let us begin. We begin with the Pasuk V'yasev Elokim et ha'am derech hamid b'yam suf v'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. God led the people around by way of the desert to the Reed Sea, and the children of Israel were armed when they went up out of Egypt. Rashi explains the chamushim, which is a word which could mean different things. En chamushim ele mozuyanim. He says here it's quite clear that it refers to being armed, having weapons. And then he proceeds then to tell us the following. Chamushim could also mean, though, something else. If you recall, 4/5 of Am Yisrael died during Makat Choshech, because they didn't want to leave Egypt when God said, let them go free. And so what is the chamushim? Chamesh means 5, a fifth. And so only 20% of Am Yisrael did leave Egypt. And so we have here, an allusion to the fact that both they came out armed, as well as the fact that only a fifth of Am Yisrael left Mitzrayim. The question, though, is the following. What is the connection between the two? Rav Shmuel Gelbard in his Lipshuto Shel Rashi tries to explain it. He first tells us the chamushim means mezuyanim, and then he explains to us why Rashi felt the need to say this now. Of course, if Am Yisrael left Mitzrayim already, and they left Mitzrayim with the weapons, why are we being told this now in Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk Yud Chet? He says the reason why we're told it now is because the reason why they had weapons was in need of their addressing the challenges and dangers of their journey. And here we're told that their journey was going to be more circuitous. So since it says that Am Yisrael, V'yasev Elokim et ha'am derech hamidbar, we're therefore told by Rashi here that that's why they had weapons with them. But then he goes on to say, but what's the connection between chamushim meaning armed and chamushim meaning a fifth? And he says, well, we said the majority of the Jews didn't want to leave Egypt. And this is the reason that even those who did leave, we were worried that if they saw war, they would want to go back to Egypt. And that's why they had weapons. So, explain to say as follows. Am Yisrael left Mitzrayim with weapons. We're told that only when we find out that they went on a circuitous route, because until that point we wouldn't necessarily understood why they needed those weapons. And why does Rashi tell us here that it also means a fifth of them? Because when you're a much smaller people, you're going to feel much more vulnerable in terms of having to contend with dangers, and thus you're reassured by being chamushim. Let's move on. ויקח משה את עצמות יוסף עמו כי הסביר בני ישראל לאמור פקוד יפקוד אלוקים אתכם ועליתם את עצמותיי מזה אתכם. Here referring to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu took Yosef's bones when they left Egypt, and according to Midrashim, this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was doing. He was getting the Atzmot Yosef when Am Yisrael were getting all those other things from the Mitzrim, and this shows us really the priorities of Moshe Rabbeinu. On this says the Geresh Karmel the following: V'yikach Moshe et atzmot, v'yikshu Mefarshim u'v'rosham ha'alshich. And the Mefarshim ask, especially the Alshich, K'shenas'u miramses l'Sukkot, haya lo lomar zeh lakach et atzmot Yosef. A bit like what we said before. How come the weapons weren't mentioned earlier? He's saying, how come Yosef's bones weren't mentioned earlier? We've already been told about part of the journey of Am Yisrael. How come Yosef's bones weren't mentioned earlier on? B'shem Godel Echad Shamati says, and I've heard an answer from a great Godel. How is it possible that Moshe Rabbeinu would be carrying the bones of Yosef? Surely, even though Yosef was Yosef, him carrying a coffin, it was beneath his kavod. And this Godel quoted by Zombrowski says, actually until this point, Moshe allowed and gave permission, perhaps even instructed others to actually carry the Arono Shel Yosef. Yes, Moshe went to get it, but other people were carrying it. But when he saw that Am Yisrael were being taken a more circuitous route, because of the fear that maybe they'll get worried and they'll want to go back to Egypt. He was worried that if the people do want to go back to Egypt, they're going to take Arono Shel Yosef with them. That's why at this point Moshe says, I'm going to be in charge of the Arono Shel Yosef. I'm going to carry it. Let's move on to another pasuk. And Parah said about the children of Israel, they are trapped in the land, the desert has closed upon them. Nevuchim, says Rashi, klu'im shukaim. They are locked, right, and they are unable to leave. Interestingly, the phrase nevuchim, the Rambam uses for more nevuchim, is drawn from this word. To be trapped, to feel confused, to feel you can't get out of things. And the Rashbam explains here, why are they nevuchim? Because they look back and they've got desert on one side, water on another, and they are totally trapped. And I think a lot of times we also feel a sense of nevuchim, that we're not able to move forward. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like he did for Am Yisrael, gives us a plan, a direction, clarity. He opens waters to us just as he opened waters for Am Yisrael. Moving on, we come to the Shira. What are we told? God revealed his glory to Am Yisrael. He pointed with his finger. This is what we learn from the word zeh, which is generally a code word in the Torah to HaKadosh Baruch Hu pointing something out. Right? A shivcha, maidservant, saw at the Yam Suf what the other prophets didn't see, or as some people say, Yechezkel ben Buzi didn't see. But the question then is the following, and this is asked by Rabbi Yochanan Leibovitz in his Das Torah. Okay. Of Mechilta, he says, that the maidservant at the Yam Suf saw what even the greatest of prophets, and including especially Yechezkel, didn't see. And he asked the following, what's the connection between Yechezkel and the perception of the Merkava with the Nes here? He says, the miracle happening here isn't just what happened. It's not that something amazing happens, and in so doing, they were able to perceive the wonders of God. What really happened is that they sensed the revelation of God. Meaning what Rav Yochanan says is the following. We think they saw the Kriyas Yam Suf, and as a result of that, it was like they have a spiritual encounter with God. He says, no, it's the other way around. That is spiritual encounter of God that brought about the Nes. The same thing happens with the Torah. What happens at Matan Torah? The Ikar, the central aspect of Matan Torah, is revelation of God. It wasn't we received the Torah and therefore we felt God's presence. So we felt God's presence, received the Torah. Similarly at Yam Suf. It wasn't the miracle happened and we felt God's presence. It was we felt God's presence and the miracle happened. Let's move on. It's talking here about the man. And the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm going to give you bread from heaven, and in so doing, I'm going to test you. The Mefarshim all debate what this means. What kind of test is God giving Am Yisrael? Rashi says, the test is that they keep Shabbos. The rule was that the man doesn't come out on Shabbos. The test is, do you heed my instructions about not going out of your tents on Shabbos to try and find man that won't be there? That's Rashi. However, I want to share with you that Orach Chaim says something very similar, the Kli Yakar too, about a different understanding of the Anasena, which is so relevant to us today. What were Am Yisrael given here? Man. What is man? Ready prepared food. When you have to hunt food, when you have to prepare food, when you have to cook the food, then you lose time. You're doing all that stuff. And as a result of that, that's your excuse why you can't do other things. The test of the midbar is, what do you do with your free time when the man is ready prepared? When there's nothing that you need to do to prepare the food, then you've got a laid table to learn Torah. Then you've got the time that you need in your schedule to do mitzvahs. That's a test. When you've got the time, what do you do with it? Nowadays, in our day and age, we have so many great tools that speed up the household processes. We have washing machines, we have dishwashers, right? Our cars get to places quick. What are we doing with the spare time? That's a test in our life, like it was a test in the time of Am Yisrael. Let's end with our last pasuk. V'ikru Beis Yisrael et shmo man v'ukezer agad lavan v'tama k'tpichad dbash. And Am Yisrael call it man, and it's like a coriander seed. It's white, it tastes like wafer and honey. I wanted to share with you a beautiful insight by Rabbi Shimon Schwab in his Mayam Beit HaSheva. And here he discusses this classic idea of what did the man actually taste like. And we are taught, there's a tradition, that the man tasted like whatever a person wanted it to taste like. The man tasted according to whatever a person was thinking about. So he says, so what did the man taste like if you weren't thinking about something specific? If you're thinking about roast chicken, it tastes like roast chicken. If you're thinking about toast, it tastes like toast. What happens if you weren't thinking about anything? And he explains that this question was asked by the Chavetz Chaim when the Rav Shimon Schwab was by him for Parashat Shabbos Pekudei Shanat Taf Reish Tzadi. And he described this amazing thing. The Chavetz Chaim is sitting there around the Shabbos table, and they're having this conversation. The Chavetz Chaim turns to everybody and he says, what was the taste of the man if you didn't have a machshava? And as he says, the Chavetz Chaim asked the people around his table, what did they think about his question? They were all quiet. He says, I'll tell you what I think. And he says, without any thought, it's tasteless. Every spiritual matter acquires a flavor based on your intentions, based on your thoughts. If you're learning Torah and you come with a positivity towards Torah, then that's what you're going to have. But if you come to Torah and you don't have any attitude whatsoever, then sometimes the Torah is going to be tasteless. From here we learn a profound lesson, that our thoughts affect our experiences. We see that with the man, we see this with Torah. This is a cloud that the Chavetz Chaim taught those around the Shabbos table, including Rav Shimon Schwab in Shnat Taf Reish Tzadi. So let's just do some chazara. We learn from the Rashi on Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk Yud Chet that there's a connection between the Am Yisrael going out armed and the fact that Am Yisrael are a small people. We learn from the Rashi about the Atzmot Yosef that in fact, because that wasn't mentioned previously, the Moshe Rabbeinu didn't actually carry the Atzmot until he felt that there was a worry that the people would take those bones back to Mitzrayim. What is Nevuchim? Nevuchim means being completely confused, as mentioned. That's a word that the Rambam uses for Zmor Nevuchim. And we wait sometimes when we're most confused for a sign from heaven to know where to go. In terms of Kriyat Yamsuf, what was it that Rata Shibcha Layam Mashla Ra'u Nevi'im? The meaning of that is that the essence of Kriyat Yamsuf isn't the fact that the water split, it's the fact that we had a revelation. The revelation is the former and the miracle is the latter, and as too with Matan Torah. Leman and Nasenu, God tests us. God is always testing us with our spare time. How do we use our time, the most precious gift we have? And lastly, in terms of the man, we learn from the man that it tastes like whatever we wanted it to taste like. That means our life experiences are determined, they're shaped, they're guided by our want, our willpower, our machshava. So especially when we're doing mitzvahs, when we're doing limud Torah, we should have a machshava tova, we should have a good intention. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.